Hey guys, what if Naruto was immortal and existed even before the gods themselves? Like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 7, Sowing the Seeds. Is that it? The fabled home of the gallant? The Jade Emperor muttered, unimpressed with the sight below him. He floated in the sky alongside another man, this one noticeably happier. Ha! Well, I didn't choose the name, but I can't help but blush when I hear it, hee. A blond man rubbed his head while his cheeks colored in embarrassment. His dear followers had decided to honor him that way. The red-haired deity remained silent. Well, do you like it? Look how hard everyone is working, the blonde urged, and waved his hand at the hustle and bustle of various creatures, all going about their daily lives. The city itself was not glamorous, it could even be called a large village. The houses, however, all had their unique style and architecture, showcasing both the diversity of the residents and their creativity. The god opted to stare at the city emotionlessly. "Oh Kwang, I'd like to formally welcome you to my city. This is a place in which everyone is welcome. Human, spirit, yokai, and even you guys. All are welcome to sit and dine on the same table." The man continued, heedless of the god's thoughts, even as he detected a steadily rising amount of negativity within him. "Oh, speaking of dinner, would you like to join us for tonight? We're having a banquet to celebrate the news of the alliance." "Eh? Oh Kwang? You okay there?" The sage poked the redhead with a finger, only for his hand to be slapped by the deity. "I was wrong about you," Kwang said, his voice cold. "Huh?" Naruto was genuinely confused, but before he could ask for clarification, his guest continued. "You might have been born mortal, but I was willing to give you a chance to become one of us. I was even going to extend the same courtesy to these siblings of yours." The man's third eye opened itself as he spoke to the sage, his gaze never turning away from the city, even as his lips curled in disgust. "But this? A city that equates maggots to gods? Are you really that willing to insult us?" The Jade Emperor finally shifted his gaze towards the sage, his third eye glowing. Naruto's eyes widened at the accusation, and he began waving his hands in front of him in panic. "Oh Kwang, calm down. This isn't what I want. No! This city has no right to exist. It goes against all we stand for," the deity shouted as his body began to glow along with his eye. "Purity, power, prestige, all of these belong to those chosen to stand above the rest, like us. Fraternizing with lower insects? Don't make me laugh." The redhead was flailing his arms whilst giving his speech, the man's words bordering on fanaticism. Naruto's eyes widened at the sight before he hurriedly floated between his guest and the city. "Oh Kwang, do you understand what you're saying?" His shout attracted the attention of the various creatures below, who all started to wave excitedly. "I do. If you are so willing to make a fool of us, then I will show you the error of your ways," the Jade Emperor yelled before he raised a hand to the sky and brought it down. Suddenly, day became night. Naruto's eyes widened in alarm, for rocketing towards the earth was a gigantic meteor. "Consider this a declaration of war," the Jade Emperor shouted. Prologue to War. Anti-M's Garden Gnome Emporium, 2nd of September, 2000. "Can I really change?" Medusa's lips quivered as she uttered the question meekly. She was still draped in Naruto's arms, with the man soothingly rubbing her back in an attempt to calm her down. After a few minutes of silence, the sage finally spoke up. "Medusa, do you understand how many lives you've taken?" The woman flinched. His tone, although gentle, did not carry any warmth within it. "These people, each and every single one of them was an individual with dreams and aspirations of their own." Medusa gripped the man's back at his words. "They each had either families or loved ones. Loved ones that will probably never forgive you and carry their hatred for you even when they've left this world." The woman's tears were dripping down her cheeks as she hiccuped. Naruto had expected this reaction. Although his words were harsh, it was a truth that the woman needed to hear. "I'm telling you this so you understand," he continued. "I will not help you to look for the forgiveness of others, as that is something I cannot influence. But I can help you to forgive yourself. The man separated from her and looked her in the eyes with his hands on her shoulders. Only when you understand the size of the weight you're carrying will you be able to finally live with it on your shoulders. You will likely never truly be free from it. But I can help you, by making sure you live the rest of your life, whether you choose to spend it as a mortal or an immortal, in peace and tranquility. Naruto's speech seemed to have worked as he could feel her negative emotions dwindle. Medusa, will you embark on this journey with me? To rediscover what it means to be yourself? Naruto finished his piece by presenting her with his hand. The woman's snake hair was in disarray, her slitted eyes were a puffy red, and tear tracks ran down her cheeks. But even with that appearance, a shy smile adorned her face. Slowly, she raised her hand and grasped his own. Thank you, she muttered. Where will we go? There's nowhere I can escape their sight. The woman was understandably nervous the Olympians would end up finding her again. Ahaha. Don't worry about that. Naruto waved her worries away. No one's gonna be bothering you where I'm taking you. In fact, the blonde grinned with a certain glint in his eyes. One could say you'll be Gorgon. He winked at her. Snort. Medusa held her hands to her mouth to stifle her giggles, but when Naruto wiggled his eyebrows at her she completely lost it and exploded in laughter. So much so that her eyes watered. That was terrible, she said after calming down and wiping her tears away. Naruto grinned at her and squeezed her hand before they disappeared in a flash. Moments later, the sage reappeared in the kitchen, looking quite pleased with himself. His face fell when he looked at the mess around him and the unfinished patties left on the counter. With a poof of smoke, a few shadow clones appeared around him and started cleaning up while he went to the counter to finish the food. Even thousands of years later, the shadow clone technique would remain his favorite. The door leading to the Emporium's kitchen was pushed open by Naruto's back. He was balancing two large trays, each with 2 plates on them. A scrumptious-looking hamburger sat on each plate with a side of fries and a can of soda to accompany the meal. As he walked towards the table, he could see the kids were half asleep. Luke had his head to the table, and Annabeth, adorably enough, was using Talia's lap like a pillow. Zetsu for some reason seemed to be in some sort of trance. The raven-haired girl, upon seeing him, threw her hands up in exasperation. Finally! She exclaimed, jolting Annabeth and Luke awake. We've been waiting forever. Were you guys making out or something? Zetsu started coughing suddenly, having apparently swallowed his own spit after hearing that. Naruto blinked owlishly at Talia. No? Why would you think that? We heard a lot of noise. We wanted to go inside, but Zetsu told us not to. Said you did this kind of thing often? The girl clarified. So we thought you two were, doing adult stuff, Luke added with a teasing smirk. Naruto opened his mouth to answer, but Annabeth interjected. What's adult stuff? The little girl asked with a head tilt. Talia and Luke blanched while Naruto looked at them accusingly, his expression twitching. Poop, the man forced a grin on your face. He stammered, I'll tell you when you're older? The man hoped Annabeth would accept the answer. The girl frowned in response, but then shrugged and turned to look at some of the displays around them. Naruto sighed in relief. Best father ever or not, that question was something any dad dreaded to hear from their daughters. Or pseudo-daughters in this case, since the little minx insisted on calling him Mr. Hoa. If only, the man despaired. It's been a long time since he last had a little girl to spoil, damn it. Anyway, about that, the father chuckled nervously and proceeded to explain the encounter with Medusa. He took great care to alter the story and present it as him taking care of her. Needless to say, the 3 demigods were all surprised and awed. Zetsu, on the other hand, had shifted back to his trance-like state. The sage recognized that look on his son's face. It was the same one he sported whenever he had a conversation with one of his duplicates. Naruto frowned at that, internally wondering when his son had even split himself, since he hadn't done so in years. Could he be? The sage thought, dismissing any doubt he had about his boy. Zetsu wasn't like him. He wouldn't be rash enough to do anything that could expose them. Right. Olympus, main road, a little earlier. The golden city of Olympus was among the greatest sights that anyone could witness. A veritable El Dorado floating in the sky. Enriched with sublime architecture and peppered with various temples that housed the many deities of the Greek pantheon, it floated above the Empire State Building in New York City, invisible and untouchable to the mortals living below. Similar to the Big Apple, Olympus was quite a busy city, with various spirits, minor deities, and even a few mortals always out and about on the golden paved streets, either enjoying themselves or working tirelessly to serve their patrons. On the main road leading to the Central Plaza, residents held on to their togas as they felt a breeze blow past them. They looked around curiously, probably attempting to see what caused it. Was it Lord Zeus passing through again in an attempt to escape his wife? Was it Lord Hermes running hurriedly to another job? Perhaps a mischievous wind god wanting to cause some chaos? As it turns out, the culprit was not what any of them would expect. A shadowy figure moved at almost imperceptible speed, bouncing between shadows and darker spots erratically. A few miles later, the figure stopped and landed in a darker alley, between two golden buildings, and dropped to the ground, away from prying eyes. The figure stood on its feet and pressed against the wall, its inky black complexion allowing it to disappear within the building's shadow. Shit, the figure thought frantically. A pair of yellow eyes opened in the darkness. More akin to a pair of dots, they moved left and right to scout the entrances of the alley. Judging itself to be safe, the figure detached from the wall, finally revealing itself to any outside observer. A Zetsu clone. Or more accurately, the same part that Zetsu had split from himself about a month ago, had hitched a ride on Artemis, without the latter noticing the small worm-like creature sticking to the bottom of her sandal. When the goddess had eventually teleported to Olympus, the clone separated from the huntress and moved into hiding. He crept through the corners of the city, looking for anything to eat to gain some biomass and grow bigger. He couldn't eat anyone and there weren't any vermin for him to consume. That is, before he found heaven. Or more accurately, Demeter's private potager, which the goddess seems to put as much care in as a mother would in her child, as evidenced by the abundance of unearthly healthy-looking fruits, vegetables, legumes, and even fungi. 3 guesses as to what the clone did next. While Zetsu himself liked meat, in general, more than anything, the younger Uzumaki was very partial to greens. With Demeter's potager being as good as it was, and the clone being the same as his creator in terms of personality, the temptation was too great. So the clone started raiding the garden. Lightly at first, as he still had a mission to follow, and could not blow his cover. Something which seemed to work for him as the weeks passed, and he managed to learn a great deal of information from his prowls around the city. For one, it seemed like Artemis reported her findings to Athena, and the latter seemed satisfied with what the huntress told her. Seems like even if they attracted attention, Naruto and the original Zetsu still managed to pass as a non-threat. Either that or Athena truly believed in that Shinto theory of hers and opted not to risk a pantheonic war. For 2, the clone decided to stay the hell away from the pink monstrosity that was the love goddess's temple. Not only did it smell like perfume all the time and was, in his opinion, somehow a worse color than neon orange, but the spy also kept hearing the unmistakable sounds of intercourse emanating from the temple. Day in and day out. No, he was keeping a good distance away from that menagerie. And for 3, it seemed like the security was pretty lax here, compared to the Taoists at least. No one could out-paranoid those bastards, not even the Olympian king. The only way in for mortals was through the Empire State Building, while immortals could get in with a variety of methods, and that was something the original Zetsu and his clones knew their way around. The clone would then continue his mission while occasionally visiting Demeter's garden to raid it. He would be the first to admit that he made a mistake by slowly growing bolder with his intrusions to the blonde goddess's property. If one were to ask the spy if it was worth it, he'd nod and say definitely. If one were to ask the harvest goddess about her view, however? Well, let's just say Zetsu had gained an enemy on Olympus already. That is, if the deity ever got to know who was responsible. The last time the clone saw her, Demeter had let an inhuman screech of rage before conjuring a very pointy pitchfork and marching to the council room. This brings us to where the clone's problem began. Evidently, A pissed-off Demeter could very well put the fear of herself into her youngest brother, enough for him to call a meeting over her complaints to find out who was responsible. Seeing an opportunity to observe the Olympians more closely, he took the chance. Something that, in hindsight, he should have been more careful about. Looking back, he might have been too rash, having hidden at the top of one of the columns, out of any of the gods' sight. Or so he had thought. Halfway into the harvest goddess's rant and demands to storm the underworld, since she suspected Hades was somehow behind this, the duplicate felt someone's gaze on him. Something that understandably surprised him since he was sure to be out of sight, and was suppressing himself nigh perfectly. Taking a gander, the spy peeked from their perch in the direction he felt the gaze from. The second his yellow eyes met a pair of orange flames that acted as his observer's eyes, the spy made the wise decision to, as the original Zetsu would put it, get the fuck out of Dodge. So he ran away, and now he would have to tell the original he messed up and quite possibly compromised both Naruto and Zetsu because he got careless. Fuuok thought the clone, before he went ramrod straight as he detected something approaching. Hurriedly shifting his hands into spikes, he turned and pointed them where he sensed the presence coming from. A swirl of fire appeared in front of him as a figure manifested from it. Said figure seemed to be a child, veiled in brown robes and possessing a very warm presence. A child that, funnily enough, was only a foot taller than the clone's 3-foot-tall height. The child's eyes were the very same orange flames that the spy had seen before. Those same eyes seemed to twinkle in amusement as the girl raised a hand in a placating gesture. "Calm yourself, little one, I mean you no harm and I know you don't want to make a scene." Her voice was kind but authoritative. The clone being Zetsu in essence took offense to the first part. "Who are you calling little?" "No, scratch that. Who the fuck are you?" The little creature shifted its Glasgow-like mouth in a snarl and summoned more spikes from its body to threaten the stranger. He suddenly felt a great amount of pressure, as the girl's flame-like eyes seemed to glow white and the temperature dramatically increased. The fire seemed to grow stronger around her as it burned the pointed ends of the spikes off. Now, watch that tongue of yours before I rinse it with soap." She waved a threatening finger. The duplicate internally debated on whether to book it, to fight, or to use its last resort and blow himself up, before remembering the girl's first words. "What do you mean you know? How did you find out about me?" The clone did not retract its spikes. If anything, it grew more to replace the burned ones. "I just felt you, that's all. I've sensed a lot of curiosity directed at my siblings. But you seem to have a lot of anger and condescension for someone so little." The girl's power, similarly to the clone, did not wane and only rose in challenge. "What did I say about wait? You felt me? Impossible. My energy was completely suppressed. I might as well have passed for a house plant." The spy was in denial of its failure. The original Zetsu was an expert information gatherer and could appear and disappear without a trace. Naturally, his duplicates would inherit the same talents for espionage. The girl smiled in amusement at the soy's denial. "But your emotions were not," she stated matter-of-factly. "You, sure," the clone stammered before stopping himself when the girl narrowed her eyes at them. "You're an empath." "A passive one," he continued, knowing but dreading the answer. Empaths were already rare enough. Passive empaths, as in those that did not need to actively focus to use that ability, on the other hand, the odds of meeting one were astronomically low. Even Naruto, while being able to detect negative emotions nigh passively, was at most an active empath who could only read someone's complete range of emotion when he was in physical contact with them. Passive empaths were dangerous, especially to spies like Zetsu, who had no way to completely erase their emotions without becoming a literal vegetable. The child's eyes twinkled in delight at his deduction, and she nodded. And now that I've answered your question, how about an introduction?" She smiled disarmingly at the spy. "Huh! Aren't you here to kill me? Or capture me?" The clone was honestly baffled at the stranger's nonchalant attitude. That could be excused as his power was suppressed, but there was no arrogance in her voice, only kindness. "Oh no, little one." The child waved an arm. "I sensed someone observing us and was very curious to know who it was. We rarely get new faces around here nowadays. And while I do not tolerate breaching people's privacy, especially that of my family, I could also tell you did not have any nefarious intentions. If you were, you would have done a lot more than raid my little sister's garden. The girl threw the clone a pointed look. His cheeks, surprisingly enough, colored a shade of green in embarrassment at being called out for his actions. He did not even bother protesting her use of the adjective little. You. He stammered, unable to formulate a defense before slumping. Fine. He wished the original was here. He'd have known what to do. Better yet, Zetsu might not have been caught. Name's Zetsu, the spy muttered in a defeated tone. He really could not do anything else in this situation. Escaping would have prompted the girl/goddess/whatever to report her findings to Olympus and put them on high alert. Fighting would have accomplished nothing but attract attention. Same with the kamikaze option. Zetsu? The girl patted her cheek in surprise, unaware she misspelled the name. What a peculiar name, she said. I am Hestia, and it's a pleasure to meet you. Her next statement froze Zetsu. Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, and the eldest Olympian, he internally swore. He could not have messed up more badly than he did. Screw his gluttonous stomach. Screw his original and Naruto for passing down that weakness to him. And while he was at it, screw his luck for coming across the one person who could blow his cover. Zetsu's thoughts were interrupted when he felt a bar of soap get shoved into his mouth. You thought of something rude, didn't you? Hestia narrowed her eyes at him, now inches away from the gagging clone. Auntie M's garden gnome emporium, present time. The original Zetsu sat with the rest of the kids at the table, waiting for the meal to arrive. Or more likely, just for Naruto to finish off Medusa and come back with the delicious burgers. Yes, Zetsu knew who the monster was from the second he saw her and the statues. Unlike his dad, he did his homework properly before coming here. He had a reputation to keep after all. Master Sage, Master Meat Connoisseur, and Master Spy. Please recognize. Suddenly, he felt something akin to a mental prod in his mind. Knowing it was his clone, he opened the link to receive the report. Original, the clone greeted. Zetsu, the younger Uzumaki, gave the equivalent of a mental nod before asking anything to report. I might have fricked up, the clone uncharacteristically stammered, making the Zetsu narrow his eyes dangerously. After all, they had a set protocol for this type of situation. Silence passed between them before the original spoke again. Explain, he ordered. Well, you know how we usually need to, damn it. I'll just let her explain, the clone once again stammered, further worrying Zetsu. Huh? Her? Who do you mean? Zetsu! What have you done? The original mentally shouted. Had their cover been blown already? What the fuck was his damn copy doing? He had one job. Hello, a feminine voice suddenly interjected. Who the fuck are you? Zetsu said, unknowingly repeating his clone's rude greeting. Do I need to come over here and clean your tongue too? There was a certain threatening undertone in her voice. She'll do it, original. Be careful. Zetsu threw in his 2 cents. Screw this. Who are you? How did you find this idiot? The original was quickly reaching the end of his patience and did not have time for games. Hey, the clone yelled, offended. You shut up. You're lucky I don't explode you remotely on principle. Zetsu mentally shouted at his clone. Now, there's no need for any violence here. Let me reintroduce myself. I am Hestia, the feminine voice interrupted the dispute. At this moment, Zetsu truly knew he fucked up. His pops was never going to let him live this down. So he gave the most appropriate answer to the situation. Fuck me sideways. Oh, make. Demeter was having a good day so far. She and her darling Persephone had just come back from a shopping trip together, to both spend time with one another and prepare for her daughter's inevitable return to that wretched place. People thought Hades could keep a grudge? Her little brat of a brother had nothing on her spite. Even after many millennia, she had never forgiven her brother for his crime. Regardless of how much Persephone tried to defend him, she should never have to be forced into any union like that. Zeus, too, her even bigger brat of a brother, had just as much of a hand in their situation as the lord of the underworld. Shaking off the darker train of thought, the blonde goddess marched towards her temple, intending to check on her precious garden to make sure all her other babies were growing well. She had charmed her produce to routinely grow and make a varied batch throughout the year. So even though it was September, Demeter fully expected even winter fruits like oranges to be available today. She had just come to the cottager's entrance when she felt something off about it. She stood to attention and marched through the various fields of green, looking for anything missing. Her head suddenly turned sharply in the direction of her legume section. She moved fast enough to become a blur to the naked eye and passed. Someone had taken the mature batch. Someone had taken her precious babies. The goddess clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. The corn cobs weaved into her hair popped up from her anger. Oh, this is on. Week 1 Traps. Demeter swept some dirt onto a tarp covering a pit she dug up. A large assortment of traps was laid around each field of produce, some even laid between the crops with enough care as to not harm them. The goddess smirked to herself. Whoever was foolish enough to cross her would certainly be caught. And then? Well, she could always curse them. Mwahahahiyaha. The next morning, Demeter woke up refreshed and with an eager grin on her face. Oh, she could not wait to catch that rapscallion. She could already imagine his terrified expression, trying in vain to escape one of her traps. But alas! His or her fate would be sealed. For they had done a terrible deed, a crime so horrible she might just have to. Her thoughts trailed off as she came upon her garden. Not only were the traps untouched, this time, but the mysterious thief had also taken her precious fruits. Us damn it, she clenched her fist. Week 2, Technical Support. Demeter looked into a series of monitors set up in her temple, just as her nephew finished the wiring on the latest screen and limped up to her with a notepad. Surveillance automatons, surveillance cameras with over 20 different kinds of vision, a laser grid, electric fences, sleeping gas, knockout gas, and even laughing gas. There's a lot more to the site, but I'll save my breath and just say this should take care of your problem, Hephaestus said gruffly. Yes, thank you, nephew. The goddess waved a dismissive hand to the god, not moving her eyes away from the monitors. Hephaestus' beard let out a few sparks at the dismissal before huffing a whatever and teleporting out. Demeter rubbed her hands together and chuckled. A few days later, the goddess became confident she had chased off the thief. While she would have preferred to catch them, and possibly torture them, she'd take what she would get. Oh, she should have thought about this before. Why work harder when she could work smarter? Sometimes her genius was so massive, it generated gravity. Ahuhu, she could not wait. Why, she bet that fool was off crying at missing the divine flavor of her beautiful. Apparently, the tech was useless when the thief could just suck the carrots underground. Us damn it. Week 3 Stakeout. Is this really how you want our last day together to be? Persephone stood with her arms crossed, dressed in a flowing black dress and looking radiant even in the dark color. Shhhhhh, dear. You'll alert the thief to our position. Demeter knelt behind a fake bush, dressed in military gear, with her hair tied beneath a helmet and her face painted green, black, and brown. She even had a pair of night vision goggles she had wrestled from her more violent nephew. Meh, he'll get over it. I just think this is a little over the top, Persephone said, exasperated with her mother's antics. Oh, relax, my little Kore. Don't call me that name. I'm not a child anymore, mother. The queen of the underworld cut her mother off with a shout of embarrassment. Oh, don't be like that, dear. Now settle down. I still need to find that little pest. Demeter waved a hand to her daughter, all too used to her childish tantrums, and attempted to put her focus back on her task. Oh, I'm settling down all right. I'll settle back to the underworld. The younger goddess huffed as she made to leave. That last statement had apparently been enough to snap Demeter's attention to her. Oh, come on. Do you have to return now? The blonde goddess whined at her daughter, her attention turned back to her. Her little Kore could be so mean sometimes. We've had the same discussion hundreds of times, mother. I need to go back to my husband. Persephone stomped her foot as she raised her voice. Oh, Seyur! It's always Hades this. Hades that. Why is it you never care so much about me anymore? Demeter despaired. Oh, us. Mother, you know full well that's not what I mean. the younger goddess said, holding her head in frustration. Oh, I know what you meant. Schlop. What was that? Demeter screeched in surprise and brought the goggles to her eyes, frantically looking around the potager. She had been so distracted arguing with her daughter she had foregone her task. Could the thief really have used such a small window to strike? The lack of tomatoes answered her question. A series of pops were heard before her helmet blew from her head in a shower of popcorn. US damn it! Week 4, last resort. This was it. Demeter was going to pull her trump card for this. As much as it pained her to do so, she had magically altered many of her babies into what can only be described as carnivorous plants on steroids. If the thief could evade detection, she'd make sure they wouldn't be able to eat anything by simply having their meals become too dangerous to consume. She didn't even care about her batch anymore, she just wanted to kill the little shit disrespecting her. At this point the goddess was unrecognizable. Her hair was a mess, her toga was in disarray, and her eyes had bags from sleep deprivation. It had gotten so bad that her servants had started giving her a wide berth. Let them be scared. She had half a mind to start interrogating them too if she hadn't already done so in the 3rd week of this charade. She had gotten hysterical, to the level where she had foregone sleep, rest, and her duties for this task. Persephone had left for her stupid brother's domain, and she was left alone to deal with this nonsense. Tonight would mark day 24 since that crime spree started. She sat on a chair overlooking her garden and looked at the monstrosities she had created, all of them moving and seemingly feeling out for any prey around them. This time, she'd get him. By Gia, her eyelids were getting heavy. Maybe a minute of rest would do no harm. Just a minute. As sunlight hit her eyes, Demeter jolted awake, looking around like a madwoman. Surely nothing could have happened. Her worries were answered in the worst way possible when she noticed most of her newest plants lying limp on the ground and missing large chunks of their stems and whatever remained of their fruits. Demeter's face grew purple from rage as she manifested a pitchfork. Oh, for the love of US! Who the hell is doing this? Who's the motherfucker with a death wish? Chapter 8, Sort of Warm Meetings. This is the life. Blub. Just me, my boy, and nothing to bother us while we catch dinner. Ain't that right, Zetsu-chan? Blub, pwh, Zetsu exclaimed as he pulled his head out of the water. Both Naruto and Zetsu were seated in a small boat. Or more accurately, the elder of the two was lounging with his legs propped up, a straw hat on his face, and a fishing rod held in his hands. The younger Uzumaki, on the other hand, sat at the edge of the vessel and kept dunking his head in the water. Zetsu was both trying to look for fish by stretching his neck down and holding his breath at the same time. Of course, he could simply grow gills or use a technique to generate oxygen, but the boy was as eccentric as his dad and liked to challenge himself sometimes. The boat itself was a double-hulled canoe and a gift to the two travelers from a distant island. The people there called themselves the Ivotans and were generally welcoming and hospitable if a little too superstitious. Naruto had decided to take the boat and sail it towards the east without any sort of map or navigation tools. Getting lost in the world was how one had fun after all. It's been a few months since their departure, and if Zetsu was right, they'd have to have drifted far to the east, probably further than any human civilization had ever been. Entire weeks would pass without any sight of landmass, and it would sometimes prompt both father and son to go into a deep slumber. On the upside, the peace allowed Naruto to work on his fishing skills or meditate, whichever helped alleviate the boredom. Pops! I saw something big. It's coming from that way. Zetsu pointed in a direction to Naruto's right. That jolted Naruto awake, and he got up in a crouch, before reeling in his line. A dead bird attached to the fishing hook emerged from the water and was shot into the air by the blonde's tug. The man rotated the pole and directed the bait he was using in the direction Zetsu pointed at. Not even a moment after the bait was plunged into the water, did the line go taut. Woohoo! Looks like I got it. I got it! Aha! Zetsu, my boy! Prepare to witness the greatness that is Naruto and Uzumaki. Best fisherman! The blonde yelled while doing some exaggerated tugging motions, seemingly fighting a tug of war with the animal. Said tug-of-war was causing the ship to sway dangerously and water to splash into the vessel. Stop playing around with it, and just pull it out, Pops. You'll capsize the ship. The green-haired boy screamed as he kicked at his father. Oh. But I just want my boy to be amazed. Your dad is super strong, you know. The father whined. I know you're strong, Pops. But I don't want to get all our stuff wet. The boy pleaded as he held onto the mast for dear life. The man paused and sighed. Fine. He stopped his tugging as he suddenly stood straight. The boat even stopped swaying and the water around them went completely still. The man then reeled the fishing pole back quickly and the sea exploded in front of them as a giant sea monster emerged, pulled up by the line. Naruto did not blink in surprise at the creature, which looked like a giant tuna fish. He simply pointed 2 fingers at its head and fired a small electric bullet. Lightning style, bee sting. The bullet struck the creature under the mouth and came out from the other side, effectively hitting and frying its brain in the process. The giant tuna dish landed on its side, floating lifelessly next to the boat. Before both travelers could say anything, the fish's side opened up and a large cloud of steam erupted from within the wound. The corpse itself shriveled before morphing into another shape. Looking more akin to a large egg, the fish's new form cracked and an inscription appeared on its side. Seeing as the fishing hook was now stuck in the egg, Naruto tugged the object towards the boat before peering into it with his son. It came to both Uzumaki's surprise as within the egg lied a sleeping, pudgy dark-skinned baby. The boy, as was apparent from his naked state, looked to be a few months old, and had a thick tuft of curly black hair sitting upon his head. The little one opened his eyes at the sudden movement of his crib, before spotting a man and a monster gazing at him curiously. He began crying and wailing in fright. Naruto immediately reached into the egg and took the surprisingly heavy baby out before holding him in his arms, something which calmed the boy somewhat. Zetsu for his part noticed the inscription on the side of the egg, which shockingly enough, was written in Chinese script. Maui the boy read, surprised. The entire situation looked eerily familiar to the short Uzumaki, and he couldn't help to think that it was no coincidence. What were the odds of a baby not only emerging from the fish but having a familiar script written on its crib? Someone or something had sent the infant to them. Huh! What's this? What the hell? Naruto's shout snapped Zetsu out of his thoughts. Oh! Who the hell were this kid's shitty parents? The man shouted as his energy flared from his apparent anger. The waves around the boat picked up violently, and the boat itself started swaying from the onslaught of energy. The sage had seen something blue imprinted on the child's shoulder and, out of curiosity, had turned the boy around to look at his back. What he saw made his blood boil. Whoever it was that sent the child, they'd seen fit to tattoo its back with an image of 2 silhouettes throwing a smaller one to the sea. One did not need to be a genius to figure out this meant the child was abandoned to die. Said Chid, as if sensing the immense show of power, had started crying again. Something that had the sage quell his rage almost immediately. The man reached up with his hand and started tickling the baby's belly, making its cries of fright turn into giggles of mirth. Ugh, this is bad, what are we going to do? Zetsu asked the more obvious question. Naruto looked at the now laughing boy with kindness. Not even a year old and already hated by the world, huh? Welp, looks like I'm a dad again, huh? Bahaha. The blonde laughed as he made his decision. Ugh, the younger Uzumaki thought in annoyance. Yes, he could understand where his father came from, but couldn't he see someone out there was trying to order them around? Or had a path laid out to the kid? Maui, huh? A great name for a brave warrior of the sea. Bahahaha. Naruto simply did not care, he was quite happy being a father, and the baby himself was happy to find a family as well. The Adventurer Meets the Sage. Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium, 3rd of September, 2000. As Apollo's chariot peeked over the horizon, the building and the surrounding forests were bathed in its ray of warmth, prompting the rise of various animals and the chirps of the early birds. Away from any urban noise pollution, the Emporium was instead exposed to nature's lullaby. All in all, it looked like a very peaceful morning. You did what? A scream came out and shook the front sign off the building. Naruto paced with his arms held behind his back and sporting an angry look on his face. Zetsu, on the other hand, stood to the side in his true form. The younger Uzumaki held one of his arms as he looked at the floor. He held himself more akin to a guilty child than anything else. The group had spent the night at the Emporium, using Medusa's old mattress, some of her cushions, and their own sleeping bags to get comfortable. While the girls had taken a room, Luke had opted to sleep in the same room as the Uzumakis. Naruto, for his part, had been a tad worried. Zetsu had remained eerily silent throughout the evening, even as his negative emotions spiked at random intervals. The son had eventually talked to his father and convinced him to put a privacy seal on both rooms so they could have a conversation outside without worrying about the demigods eavesdropping. Zetsu had pulled Naruto outside, morphed back into his inky black, 3-foot self and proceeded to let out what was bothering him all night. Evidently, Naruto's worries were very much valid. There was one thing we had to avoid, Zetsu. The father raised a finger for emphasis. I know, Pops. You made a technique just so we could get in and out undetected. The man did not stop, even as he interrupted his son. Yes, I did. I don't need a second heavenly war on my hands. Do you know how much was destroyed last time? I don't need to see half the country burned to cinders. Naruto waved his hands as he ranted. They won't. Of course they will. Do you think they give a shit if millions perish in the crossfire? Okwang and his posse didn't. That fucker Mara didn't. And I'm not willing to take that risk. Naruto held his hands to his face. Memories of a past war he'd long repressed briefly surged back. Forests in ashes, mountains decimated, the bodies of thousands of creatures lying in various mangled states, the smell of death prevalent in the air. All that unnecessary, avoidable loss of life. Boss! Help us! Pops! Zetsu's shout snapped the man out of his brief episode. The man looked at his son in surprise, eyes glowing gold and expression frantic. It's okay. Zetsu, my stupid duplicate, told me the one who found us just wants to meet us and talk, the smaller Uzumaki said with his hand up in an effort to calm his father down. An eyebrow raised in interest, Naruto asked the most obvious question. Eh? And who's that? Hestia, Zetsu replied simply. Hestia? The man stretched her name out, expecting his son to elaborate. The green-haired Uzumaki's palm met his face in a wet slap as he sighed. The eldest Olympian, goddess of the family and home, hearth, domesticity, virginity, and the state, he trailed off, noticing a flash of recognition light up in the man's eyes. Oh! The man clapped his fist with his palm in realization. You mean the good one, he said. Zetsu's hands twitched before he made a strangling motion, whilst muttering curses under his breath. Yes, the good one, the son nodded resignedly. Naruto did have a point, since Hestia was the only Olympian without any innocent blood on her hands. But it frustrated Zetsu to no end that his father never seemed to take information gathering as seriously as he did. So, what did you mean before? About her coming to meet us? The sage asked. Well, she asked to come immediately, but my clone briefed her on the other kids, so they decided to come in the morning, the younger Uzumaki explained. Cool, so is your clone gonna bring her here? Or Naruto trailed off, unsure of the next course of action. We already said her name twice, she should know where we are, Zetsu explained matter-of-factly. The Greeks could, like other gods, sense when they were being talked about, which did make their infiltration harder than it had to. But that sense only applied to their names and names alone, and in the areas they had influence in. Just as Zetsu predicted, a swirl of fire appeared in the air in front of the duo, and a young woman materialized from it. Hestia had taken an older appearance, now looking more like an adolescent, while Zetsu hitched a ride on her shoulders like a child. Zetsu's eyes zeroed in on his clone, who for his part, dropped from his perch and hid behind the goddess's legs in fear of what his creator would do. Original, high? Zetsu peeked out from behind Hestia. The deity in question held a hand to her mouth to stifle her giggles at the display before regaining her composure. Ahem, hello there. You must be Zetsu and Mr. Naruto. This little one told me much about you, she gestured to Zetsu. Oh, did he now? Zetsu hissed, making the clone eep and hide back behind the veiled woman. "Don't let him kill me, big sis!" the clone cried out. That last part prompted a raised eyebrow from Naruto. "Big sis?" Yufufu, the woman, giggled again at the little creature before looking at the blonde subject of interest. "So, you're the one behind all the recent ruckus." She smiled at the man. Naruto smiled back, sensing no negative emotions coming from the woman, and approached her with his hand out. "I up. Naruto and Uzumaki. Nice to meet ya," he said cheerily, seemingly forgetting about his earlier reservation. Oh, don't get him wrong, he was still mad at his son for his stunt and apprehensive of the potential risk of blowing their cover. But sensing no negativity coming from Hestia alleviated some of his worries, which prompted a more diplomatic response. And he needed physical contact to get a complete readout of the woman. "Yes, sir, dumb high IQ move indeed." Hestia looked at him amusedly, as if she knew what he was thinking, before raising her smaller hand and let it be enveloped in his larger one. Several things happened for both parties in that instant. Both Naruto and Hestia's eyes widened, one in pleasant surprise and the other in muted shock. Such a beautiful soul! Naruto's eyes began to water at what he had felt. Anything he might have read did not do the woman justice. All the myths could not come close to describing the sheer purity of her soul, of her very essence. Everything about her screamed wholesome, so much so that Naruto had to rein in every fiber of his being that demanded he gives the goddess hugs and head pats. A brief surge of rage overtook him when he got glimpses of her early life. Of Kronos. Forget any reservations he might have had. After this, he was going to drown her in his fatherly affection. It's the least he could do. Hestia's thoughts, on the other hand, while similar, were also overwhelmed by a feeling of dread, for she had been exposed to the man's true self. Meaning she had come to know just who she was dealing with. The legendary gallant sage of the East, one of the more obscure figures in the Asian continent. She hadn't much thought about him, since he seemed to never make too much of an appearance other than in texts and hearsay. She had even gone as far as to, ironically enough, label him a myth. That was before the heavenly war which had sent ripples of fear and apprehension through the supernatural world. An event that had resulted in one of the strongest pantheons in history to capitulate to, from what she had known, a single entity. The fact that said entity did not belong to a pantheon had almost sent panic through their ranks as it had done to so many others. With that into account, it was quite surprising that the day Hestia finally met the sage, he had completely blown her expectations aside. Were she to ever meet him, she had expected an arrogant, selfish, and cruel person, not this. This saint. Regardless of the frightening amount of power he possessed and how eerily similar his energy felt to that of her grandmother, his aura, his emotions, everything about him pointed towards a genuinely kind-hearted man. Humble despite the abilities he possessed and forgiving despite his dark past, he was the sort of person she had, sadly enough, only ever seen a very small handful of. In fact, the person most similar to him would be, surprisingly enough, her own mother. With what her ex-husband had done to her, one would think the former Titan Queen would have become a bitter woman. Instead, the Olympians had thankfully gained a parent so kind and gentle. Hestia genuinely felt overwhelmed whenever her dear mother visited them, whether individually or on Olympus. Ria was simply one of a kind, or at least she was until she'd met Naruto here. Why did she feel a sudden chill at the thought of the two ever crossing paths? While both Naruto and Hestia were occupied in their own thoughts, Zetsu, seeing his only protection had disappeared, eked as several spikes attempted to pierce him. The clone shifted his body around the sharp extensions and moved back, almost blurring from sight as he scrambled to escape his original's rage. "Come back here, you little bitch!" Zetsu screamed as he shifted and grew, resembling an eldritch horror, as several black spikes and tentacles launched themselves at the clone. The spikes struck true before a poof of smoke enveloped the clone, leaving behind a punctured wooden log. Zetsu quickly looked around and found an open window, with a black tendril barely getting out of it. The green-haired Uzumaki saw red. "Zetsu!" he screeched and took chase, leaving both his father and the goddess behind in their trance-like state. Meanwhile, Luke, Talia, and Annabeth remained blissfully unaware to the happenings outside. They were content to have a good night's sleep under a roof after a month spent under the stars. Oh, make. The words The Tonight Show with Bonin Akrian flashed on the screen with the words for Supernaturals being written in tinier script under it. A jazzy introduction theme played accompanied by the applause of a live audience. A pale-looking man with striking orange hair and pointed ears sat on an oak desk in a corner of the stage, clad in a fancy green suit and sporting a winning smile. Looking quite similar to a tall leprechaun, he waited a few moments for the audience to calm down. "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Wait for It Tonight's Show." Bonin winked at the crowd. "Ba dum tss. Cue audience dying of laughter. Jokes aside, I have the pleasure to inform you that today, we've got something good. It was pretty difficult to get into contact with them, but tonight's guests are one of a kind. Now I know I'm supposed to present their resume, but we don't have enough airtime for that." The man's teeth sparkled as he smiled at the crowd. Ba dum tss. Cue audience dying of laughter. "Aha, I'm too much, I know." The leprechaun wiped a fake tear from his eye before gesturing to the far left of the stage. "So without further ado, please give it up for the legendary gallant sage of the East and his son, the famous Naruto and Zetsu." Applause. Naruto and Zetsu, dressed in a pair of black suits with an orange and green tie respectively, came out from backstage and waved at the audience. They both walked towards the host and shook his hand before taking a seat on the large leather couch next to the desk. The host walked back towards his own seat and greeted them, beginning a classic string of scripted questions before getting to a particularly interesting one. "Say, Mr. Naruto, I'm sure the people at home would love to know the answer to this particular question, but which of the two of you is stronger?" "Well, Bonin, that's actually a pretty easy one to answer. You see, it's simple," the sage began before his son cut in. "I'm the stronger one." Cue audience ooze. "Excuse me?" the father said, offended. "I'm the strongest, Pops, and I can prove it." The son did not relent on his stance. If anything, he seemed more sure of himself. "What's the one thing you or anyone, no matter how powerful, cannot do? What is the one event that every creature on Earth fears like Armageddon?" Zetsu elaborated, looking at Naruto and Bonin questionably. Gasp. "Zetsu, no! You can't mean—" Naruto went pale as he saw where his son was heading. "Zetsu, yes. The truth is, I am the only person alive on Earth who cannot fear such a thing," the younger Uzumaki said, his eyes widening. "Look at me. Look at what I can do." The small imp took on various shapes, all of them crazier than the last. "Big deal. I can do that too." Naruto transformed into Zetsu to prove his point. "But you cannot change your very nature. It is indeed unfortunate, Pops, but unlike you, I cannot be cancelled," the boy screamed out. "I am a 3-foot-tall black Asian monster who can shapeshift into literally anything," Zetsu raved. "I can say anything I want. I can even say the word," he exclaimed, prompting the other men to jump on surprise. "Anything but the word," Bonin yelled, fearing for his ratings, but Zetsu was unabashed. "Fool! Witness my power and I." PSSSSSHHHHHH. The show was abruptly cut, a sign with the words "technical difficulties" being left in place. Chapter 9: Breaking the Ice. "What the hell? Is that Kaguya? Weren't you sealed? You speak of my previous shell, this is a different one." "What do you mean?" "The one known as Kaguya Otsutsuki was nothing more than an extension of my true self with naught but a silver of my power, a medium to use whilst my main body continued to slumber." What are you?" "You may know me as the mother of all earthly life, the one whose body you insects have chosen to inhabit and desecrate. I am Gaia." Memories of an Age's End. Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium, 3rd of September, 2000. And then, after scaring me half to death, the little brat had the nerve to laugh at me," Zetsu heard his father exclaim before the ensuing giggling of their guest emitted from the inn. He had just come back from reassimilating Zetsu into him. The clone had proven to be every bit as crafty as the original. Unfortunately for it, as soon as Zetsu's rage subsided, he had remembered the fact he could simply remote control his duplicates, and simply did so. "Zetsu, You finally come back. Come here and introduce yourself to this lovely young lady. For Hestia held a hand to her mouth as her cheeks colored a bit. I think you'll find I'm anything but young Naruto, she said modestly, only for the blond man to wave his hand dismissively. Eh? What do you mean? I'm the old man here. Bahaha. The man laughed. Seeing the previous tension in the air had dissipated, the green-haired Uzumaki decided to join in on the conversation. Pops, what were you talking about? That? Oh, I was telling Hestia about that time your brother, remember little Maui? At Zetsu's nod he continued anyway. I was talking about that time he faked drowning in the ocean. Took after his old man in the pranking department, that one. Bahaha, the man slapped his knee as he reminisced about one of his sons. Zetsu nodded at the answer. He indeed remembered that one, and although he was more obnoxious than he'd liked, his little brother was still one of the best people he had met. The legacy he'd left behind among the people of the Pacific ensured that, myth or not, Maui would remain a beloved figure to everyone who heard his story. After Naruto calmed down, he finally gestured for his son to sit next to him. You know? Hestia-chan, here the woman in question raised an eyebrow at the honorific, has told me an interesting story. Zetsu began to pale in dread and made to escape before feeling his father's hand grip his scalp and freeze him in place. A story which my dear boy conveniently forgot to mention in his recounting last night, about how my son, who I know I've raised better than that, has gone and committed petty theft and driven her poor sister to hysteria. Naruto's tone, coupled with his glowing eyes, gave him a menacing vibe. It wasn't me, Pops. My stupid clone did that. The younger Uzumaki pleaded. Wham! Oh! Boy, Hestia jumped in surprise at the blonde's sudden movement. He moved at high speed, let go of Zetsu's scalp before delivering his patented chop of fatherly disappointment not a nanosecond later. Unlike my clones, yours are technically other versions of you. They would literally do anything you would, Zetsu. Not only that, but you also went and committed the greatest mistake you could possibly have. The father scolded his son. Hestia nodded in agreement, and gave a look of understanding to the blonde. Although somewhat harsh, she could understand the boy needed to be disciplined. He's a good parent, she thought, impressed, and was once again reminded of her mother. Naruto's hand raised in the air and delivered a second, just as intense, chop. Wham! Whoa! Pranking 101. Never get caught, and if you are, shake off the blame. You took back the clone before he could face justice. What is this, amateur hour? The sage threw up his hands in exasperation. Zetsu, for his part, nursed the growing lump on his head with both hands. I'm sorry, Pops. Don't apologize to me, you idiot. Hestia mentally gawked at the outrageous actions. Never mind. It seemed the man had more layers to him than she had thought. Not even their exchange earlier that day could truly prepare her for his unpredictableness. A very strange man indeed. Well, now that this is over with, Naruto said before once again grabbing his son by the head and forcing him to bow alongside him, I wish to formally apologize for my son's behavior. If I meet your sister, I will make sure he apologizes to her and compensates her for the damages, the man said resolutely. Sorry for the trouble, both father and son said in the same breath. The goddess stood a little surprised. It was unnerving for her to see someone so powerful bow their head to her, or even act so much unlike her expectations. But then again, she'd come to learn in her long life that preconceived notions could never truly decide the way one should see the world. It's all right, please raise your heads, she said softly. Naruto did so and shot a grin at the goddess. You really are kind, Hestia-chan. Most people wouldn't hesitate on guilt-tripping me into doing whatever they want, the man said before bouncing closer to her, still in a Saiza position. He stopped when he was within 2 feet of her and leaned his face closer to hers. She almost recoiled back had it not been for the fact she could sense no lust in his actions. The man settled for simply gazing at her with a grin, his eyes looking into her flaming pair. Before she could ask what he was doing, she felt the man's hand land on her head gently. Pat pat. The blonde voice filled with joy, while tactlessly giving the eldest Olympian a head pat. Something not even her siblings had ever done. Oh, the goddess flushed a golden color in embarrassment, and reflex took over. Slap. The deity's hand shot up and smacked the blonde's cheek. The force of the strike was something the man clearly did not expect as he was sent careening into and through a wall. Zetsu looked on, not appearing to be the least bit worried. If anything, she could sense a tiny amount of vindictiveness from the shorter Uzumaki. Not even 10 seconds later, 2 doors swung open, with Talia and Luke came out of their respective rooms in sleepwear and brandishing their weapons. While the privacy seals soundproofed the rooms they were in, they did not prevent them from feeling the entire building shake from Hestia's strike. "What was that, Mr. Naruto?" "I felt the entire room shake," both shouted at the same time. They spotted a veiled woman with orange flames where her eyes would be, standing and looking at them in surprise with a hand extended. Naruto for his part was nowhere to be seen but from the big hole in the adjacent wall. One could only think that the lady, with her abnormal appearance and body frozen in motion mid-strike, was clearly a monster. Both demigods shouted and ran at the surprised deity's spear and golf club raised in the air. "Die!" A single war cry tore out of their throats as they flung themselves at their perceived enemy. OMPH! Before they could get any closer, air escaped their lungs as they were abruptly blocked and hoisted up over Zetsu's shoulders, who had taken his human disguise. "Stop it, you two, she's not a monster." Now, teenage-looking Zetsu's voice cut through Luke and Talia's protests and struggles. A few minutes later, both teens were calmed down and sat on the ground with many questions on their minds. Zetsu had taken a similar position facing them while Hestia sat at the edge of the trio, getting back her bearings. Booming laughter erupted from outside the destroyed wall, cutting through the tension. "Bahahaha! You're packing a hearty wallop in those stringy arms, aren't you?" Naruto had an easygoing grin on his face, despite the red handprint taking up a third of it. He did not look like a man who was just had, eloquently speaking, the bitch slapped out of him by an embarrassed goddess. The sage stepped over the still-standing portion of the wall and got back into the room to look at the occupants. Talia and Luke were looking at him like he had grown a second head. Zetsu's palm was acquainting itself, once again, with his face, and Hestia? The goddess did not take teasing well from how golden her face had gotten. Naruto's grin widened. Nothing like some comedy to ease up the tension. Why, he had the perfect pun prepared for this occasion. "Seems like we got ourselves a." He looked at the 4 seated people situation. He winked for added effect. The other 4 occupants stared at the winking man in silence, all with different thoughts. "Hiya!" A scream rang out from Talia's room as little Annabeth, clad in a makeshift pillow armor she tied with parts of the bed covers, came out of the door swinging. She wielded a hammer and a small dagger in either hand and tried her hardest to look as threatening as possible. Silence reigned once more. Naruto's face was still frozen mid-wink. No one spoke for a few seconds. PFFFFTT. Hestia's cheeks puffed out suddenly before the goddess, followed by everyone sans Annabeth exploded in laughter. The little girl looked confused before laughing meekly alongside the group. "Bahaha! That was great!" Naruto wiped a tear from his eye as he sat in the same position he was in before his trip through the wall. "Yufa. Indeed, I have not laughed like this in quite some time." Hestia's face was still flushed, but this time from sheer mirth. Her statement drew a shocked look from Naruto. "That's a darn shame," he faltered when she held up a bar of soap threateningly. "I mean, one should always laugh. Makes living fun." "Hi, J.A." He laughed uneasily. Well, you'll be surprised at how dull Olympus can get. If it wasn't for the occasional fights I have to break up or my nephew's TV show, I doubt there would be much for me to do," the deity said somewhat melancholically. Slam. Everyone sans Naruto and Zetsu jumped in surprise when the blonde slammed his palm to the ground. A tense atmosphere enveloped them as the man's hair hid his eyes. "That," he said lowly before raising his head, revealing a smirk, "is unacceptable. Tell you what? How about spending some time with us?" "Wah. But. Pops, you can't." Shush! The man's words silenced any protests Talia, Luke, and Zetsu might have had. Annabeth, for her part, had retreated back to her room to read, after taking off the, in Naruto's opinion, adorable outfit, much to the man's chagrin. "Hestia-chan here has been nothing but a delight to be around." He ignored the groan coming from his son before continuing. "The whole point of this trip is to have fun." I thought it was getting to camp, Luke whispered to Talia, heedless of the older blonde's glare. And I will not let anyone feel excluded. I expect you to give her a warm welcome and for all of us to get along. The sage finished his statement. Talia and Luke seemed satisfied, but Zetsu looked constipated. Naruto briefly realized the hypocrisy of his actions. He had just scolded his own son for potentially blowing their cover, and yet here he was willing to mingle around with one of the beings they were supposed to hide from. What can he say? In for a penny, in for a pound. Might as well gain Hestia's friendship. She seemed like a nice gal, especially with how happy she looks right now. The goddess of the hearth was positively touched by the invitation. She could feel an inner giddiness at being able to spend time with not just the demigods her family but also the father and son who had become a great subject of interest to her. It occurred to her how rare such an instance was, where she was able to drop her guard around outside of Olympus, especially around her family. Oh, she could not wait to learn more about the three demigods. What were their likes, dislikes, ambitions or dreams for the future? What were their personalities like? From her brief glimpse into their emotions, it seemed her niece was more like her father than she realized, a little spitfire that one. Her grandnephew Luke seemed a bit of a downer, but if what she'd heard from Hermes was correct, that was, unfortunately enough, a natural result of his past. And little Annabeth? That little ray of sunshine absolutely must be protected. It was almost like seeing a child version of Athena. So cute. If only her little brother hadn't been such a stickler when it came to gods seeing their children, she'd have been all over watching over the children. Sigh. Well, only one thing to do now. I gladly accept your offer, Mr. Naruto. But please, let me make breakfast for you all. It's the least I could do, she said earnestly. Why? No way. You're a guest here. The blonde waved his arms in front of him in disagreement. I assure you it'll be no trouble at all. Cooking is a pleasure for me, especially for family, the deity insisted. But aren't you all about manners? Well, it'd be bad of me to let you work, the man argued. Oh, shush. It'll be done in an instant. She waved away his concerns. Oh, come on. I was going to make my super special breakfast ramen, he pleaded. I think not. Noodles are not a good way to start the day, she disagreed vehemently. Gasp, you take that back. The blonde looked as if he was physically struck by that statement. Yofufu, if anyone needs me, I'll be in the kitchen, she disappeared in a swirl of fire. Come back here. Naruto ran towards the kitchen. Talia and Luke watched the back and forth with conflicting expressions. Talia, for her part, was mostly surprised at how calm Mr. Naruto and Zetsu were being in this situation, so much so that the father was bantering with her. Bantering? With an all-powerful goddess? What even was this? Can someone be that brave, or is it just pure stupidity? What? I am so lost right now, she admitted honestly, and Luke for his part nodded with her statement. I hear you. I knew Mr. Naruto had guts, but I didn't know he had a death wish too, he said in a deadpan before huffing as the Ravenet's elbow dug into his side. Don't be mean, she said with a frown before sighing and crossing her arms. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm not dreaming, right? She pointed at the kitchen door. That was Hestia, right? My aunt? She questioned. Yup, the teen admitted. My dad's sister? Eldest Olympian? The freckled. Yup, his tone was the same. She sounds pleasant enough, Talia admitted reluctantly. Yup. Say yup one more time and you'll be making another sound, the girl shot the smirking blonde a glare. Luke opened his mouth as if to taunt her, before wisely closing it and nodding, smirk still in place. Talia huffed before turning to look back at the door. I can't trust her yet, she muttered. Same, he nodded without any fuss. They'd already been screwed over enough by their supposed family, they couldn't let their guard down now. Mr. Naruto and Zetsu might have been strong enough to fend off monsters, but gods were in a different league. Talia flinched when she felt a hand on her shoulder, and turned to see Luke looking at her seriously. No matter what, we'll stick together, okay? he said resolutely. Okay, her cheeks colored a bit at his intense gaze. Later. This is so unfair, thought Zetsu, as he sat on a table with the demigods and waited for their meals. I make a single mistake and get bonked, but Pops can just go ahead and open up to anyone he wants. Ugh, hi, he internally groaned. Are you okay there, buddy? Luke asked worriedly after seeing a constipated look appear on the Uzumaki's face. Yeah, you've been awfully silent since all this happened. What? Are you scared or something? What started off as concern from Talia was quickly replaced with her usual snark. No, I am not, Zetsu said firmly before putting up a hand to support his cheek, but I am apprehensive of the potential risks of this development. He did not elaborate further, opting to ponder on a possible solution for their problem. It was by sheer luck that the only person to discover him knowing about them. So you're scared? The Ravenet sported a large teasing grin. No. Before the two could start a fight, the door to the kitchen opened and an enticing aroma flooded the room. The group all felt their mouths watering at the positively divine smell, as Hestia and Naruto walked back into the room, each with a plate stacked with pancakes on each hand. 2 extra plates were put down for the 2 adults as put down the stacks. As a finishing touch, Hestia snapped her fingers and a bottle of maple syrup appeared and a bowl of fruits appeared in the middle of the table. The demigods eagerly piled their plates with the fluffy breakfast food. Luke paused before eating as he held Talia and Annabeth's shoulders. They looked at each other and nodded before looking up at the goddess's expectant gaze. Thank you, Lady Hestia, the 3 said after remembering their manners, drawing a great smile on both the deity and the elder blonde's face in the process. Naruto sharply looked at Zetsu with the same expectation. The younger Uzumaki, who had been in the process of cutting his own pancakes, paused at his father's look. Yeah, thanks I guess, he said awkwardly. When he saw his father narrow his eyes, he huffed and recomposed himself. I mean, thank you for the meal. Zetsu clasped his hands and lowered his head in gratitude to the goddess of the hearth. Hestia smiled at the children in front of her. Oh, no thanks necessary, my dears. Simply enjoy my food and that'll be enough for me, she said kindly, making Naruto internally gush at the wholesome scene. Zetsu shrugged before taking a cut part of his pancakes and bringing it to his mouth. Damn, the smell was really amazing. Once the treat entered his mouth, however, he felt his mouth explode with flavor. This is, he thought as his face reddened in joy. Nirvana, he internally shouted as he felt his own soul get lighter. That was the day the expert food critic, Zetsu and Uzumaki, learned what the perfect pancake was. Oh, by the way, I never asked you, Zetsu, but whatever happened to your little friend? The goddess asked, referring to Zetsu. Her question snapped the dazed Zetsu from at the other occupants. The demigods were lost in their own happy places as the delicious food did wonders on their taste buds. Naruto simply snickered before piling up his own plate and dribbling maple syrup all over it. Ah, poop, Zetsu adequately answered. Oh, make. Oh. Annie-chan, do a pose. Naruto crowed at the girl, still in her makeshift armor, as he held a large digital camera with a Polaroid printer attached, and spammed picture after picture at different angles. The demigoddess in question pouted at the man, but obeyed him by raising her hammer half-heartedly. Oh, come on! You can do better than that! Where's the flair? Where's your panache? The blonde urged Annabeth. What did panache even mean? Naruto didn't know, he just thought it made him sound fancy after he heard it once from a photographer on the street. Mr. Naruto, are we done? The cushions are stuffy. The girl whined at the man. She even crossed her arms and stomped the ground. How cute! In a sec, done. Bahaha. This one's going in the scrapbook. The man smiled giddily while looking at the pictures. He finally selected one and waited for it to be printed. His statement got the attention of the 2 other demigods. There's a scrapbook? Talia and Luke asked at the same time, before blushing in embarrassment. Up. And it's got all the fun times we spent together. The man pulled out the printed picture and started rapidly waving it in the air. At the demigods' inquiring gazes, he moved towards one of the camping bags they carried around and reached into it, discreetly pouring chakra into a storage seal inside it, and making a large book appear in his hand, which he proceeded to pull out. The scrapbook was a large monstrosity that looked like something a kindergartner would put together, with sprinkles, colorful papers, and stickers. It had Vacation in America spelled with dry macaroni. The man waved it around like one would do to a freaking college diploma before beckoning the kids over. The demigods approached Naruto as he sat down and opened the book, showing the kids pictures of different times, both embarrassing and memorable, that they had spent together as a group. Zetsu, who stood to the side and was already accustomed to his father's antics, huffed before making for the room's exit to occupy himself. Oh, look at this one! Back when Talia-chan admitted she couldn't swim, so we threw her in shallow water. Bahahaha! The blonde father's guffaws echoed, followed by Luke and Annabeth's laughter, while Talia joined in after pouting and huffing. A small smile appeared on the younger Uzumaki's face. After everything, his pops being happy was enough to quell his worries. Chapter 10: To Poach a Goddess. Naruto felt himself floating in an endless space, illuminated by various multicolored orbs from which emerged bridges of energy, flowing and disappearing into the abyss around him. He didn't say anything as he continued to look at the spectacle. It was, of course, only his own mental projection, something that his mind was experiencing while his physical body lay in a meditative state, not moving a single muscle. He didn't know how much time had passed since he'd been here, having lost all sense of time in this exercise. Damn! I wonder how Kurama and the others are doing. He missed spending time with his siblings, but this was a necessary sacrifice to attain the power he needed. As Naruto passed by some of the shining orbs, his mind went back to the start of this training. Upon releasing Kurama, Naruto could safely say he'd physically been at his weakest since the time his partner was forcefully extracted from him back in the Fourth Shinobi World War. It was only then that he'd come to terms with his situation. He'd realized how utterly fragile he'd become. Sage or not, it was a hard pill to swallow that Kurama had been the biggest reason for his previous strength. That fact was unacceptable to Naruto. Kagaya. Gaia had opened his eyes to the existence of godlike entities in the world. It had shown him just how high the stakes were, as crazy as that is. If he wanted to protect his precious people, he would need to be strong enough to fight the entire world. So, seeing as he was immortal, he trained. He trained harder than he ever did, trying to master the techniques he knew and the different arts he learned over his travels after the war. What he was doing right now had honestly been a gamble. An attempt to reach a level beyond sagehood, to surpass the limits and weaknesses of sage mode, and reach new horizons. He had gone into a meditative position and hadn't moved since. Eventually, his mind went blank. There were no thoughts to speak of anymore, nothing for his mind to see but nothingness. And suddenly he found himself here. Floating. Swimming. With nothing but these strange apparitions to distract him. Hesitantly, Naruto raised a hand and let it be engulfed in one of the flowing rivers of energy, and suddenly Heck felt something pulse and course into his very being. He trailed off in awe while looking at the different orbs. He pulled his hand back, which was now attached to the glowing energy, letting him stay connected to one of the larger orbs. He raised his opposing hand, and with a thought, a small ball of flames manifested, looking like a miniature sun. He looked again at the orb he was linked to and saw it resonated with similar energy. With another thought, the small tendril of energy was cut off and the ball of flames disappeared with it. The blonde-haired man raised that same hand again and touched another glowing river, this one colored a light blue. A different orb, one that emitted vapor and felt cold to the touch, appeared in his unoccupied hand. He could only come to one conclusion. Those are domains. Preview to Perfect Sagehood. Olympus Athena's Temple, 3rd of September, 2000. Books, documents, and papers of all sorts flew around the large library making up the goddess of wisdom's temple. Said black-haired deity was pacing in front of her large desk located at the middle of the temple, clad in a simple gray toga for comfort over presentation. She held one of the many books while other documents floated around her, all within of which were being read simultaneously before being replaced by others. Her gray eyes were glowing intensely and seemed to gloss over information at a ridiculously high speed. Her reading paused briefly when she heard her temple's gate open, before resuming her work after sensing the familiar energy of her sister. It wasn't long before Artemis appeared from around one of the large bookshelves making up Athena's maze of a library. The brunette had taken her adult form and walked towards her sister while looking around at the chaos occurring around them. The goddess of the moon stopped before her sister and looked at her worriedly. "Is this a good time?" she asked, making the wiser sibling pause in her work. Without looking up from her documents, Athena uttered a simple no before going back to her reading. "Sister, I'm worried about you." Artemis paused to see if the woman would respond. When she did not, the brunette continued, "Father's worried too. You've been here for the last 2 weeks and haven't so much as taken a peek outside." "Sister?" Artemis narrowed her eyes as Athena continued to ignore her, seeing her mumble something unintelligible. Upon seeing some signs of fatigue on the goddess of wisdom, namely the bags under her eyes and the slightly messy hair, something that Athena would never allow to happen normally, the brunette became genuinely worried and hurried up to her sister's side. "Athena!" She grabbed the busy deity, which caused her to turn sharply towards the huntress with an irritated look. "What?" she said stiffly. "Can't you see I'm working on something important?" she continued. Athena, the brunette sighed. "You always do this. Every time you have a project on your mind, I have to come here and push you to take a rest." She crossed her arms in irritation. Abruptly, all the flying books paused as the goddess of wisdom turned towards her younger sister with a glare. "This one is important. It might be a matter of life and death," she said. "You say that every time, sister," Artemis fired back, before getting a pensive look. "Wait. Is this about what happened yesterday? I thought we agreed it was Hermes?" The huntress narrowed her eyes at her older sister. While Demeter wanted to blame Hades, the rest of the council had shot down her demand for an invasion of the underworld. Hermes was the next suspect, and despite his denials, the rest of their family didn't believe him out of habit. It didn't help that Apollo didn't confirm whether or not Hermes was lying, since the god of the sun was mad at his brother for one thing or another. Thus, Hermes had to face his aunt's wrath even though he was innocent of the crime. Artemis didn't particularly care for what happened to her brother. Even if he was innocent, many agreed he had it coming for all the pranks and mischief he pulled. "Yes. And what's been happening the last few weeks? I've been to her garden to investigate, and I even sent probes throughout Olympus, and you know what I found?" Athena asked, but before her sister could answer, she continued, "Nothing. I found nothing. No footprints, no DNA, and not even an energy signature, and it doesn't make sense. No matter who or what you are, you will leave behind an energy footprint. And you can't tell me Demeter couldn't have sensed any one of us in her own backyard." Athena's frantic exclamation snapped Artemis out of her thoughts. And that. The wise deity wildly gestured to the enormous bulletin board where a map of the US and Japan alongside pictures of many Greek gods, and even some gods that the huntress did not recognize, were pinned. The surprising thing, however, were the 2 pictures of that one blonde man and his son pinned next to Japan with question marks adorning them. "What about that?" Artemis asked curiously. "This. The blonde man. Naruto and Uzumaki and his son Zetsu. There are too many questions I have about them. You told me yourself they weren't normal. They don't act normally around us. I'm suspecting they're spies. Scouts. Vanguards from the Shinto to start another war? I don't know." The wiser sister had seemingly foregone her title as she looked ready to pull her hair out. Artemis deadpanned at the sight. She's in conspiracy mode again, she thought before deciding on her next step. "All right, sister, I think you need some rest." The goddess of the hunt raised her arms in a calming gesture and approached her sister again, intending to hold her comfortingly. "I don't need sleep. I need answers. My daughter is with them, Artemis." Athena trudged and sat down on her desk while holding her head in her arms. "My little Annabeth might die," she continued in despair. The goddess of the moon sighed. She could understand her sister's worries, especially concerning the little demigoddess. Since even with her freedom to watch over their children, gods could do nothing to help them physically because of the ancient laws enforced by Zeus. Artemis sighed at the entire situation before looking at her sister with a soft smile. If you want, I can turn that guy into a jackalope for you. Her gentle tone contradicted the sinister nature of her words. Athena sighed as well before rising from her seat with a hand to her head. No. It's fine, you're right, sister. The goddess of wisdom approached her sister and enveloped her in a hug. Thank you, she whispered. We're sisters, Athena, it's the least I could do, and don't worry, I'm sure nothing bad will happen to Annabeth. I'll watch over her for you. The moon deity returned her sister's hug with vigor before walking with her to the temple's bedroom. Auntie M's garden gnome emporium. So good. Naruto shouted in glee. His son and the demigod's reactions weren't far off, as the younger Uzumaki had simply gone catatonic, while the kids had forgotten their manners in favor of practically inhaling their portions, something that had Hestia both happy and frowning at the spectacle. She could take it as a compliment, yes, but table manners were a must. She looked at the eldest blonde and resumed her own meal with delicate poise, humming in satisfaction at her work. Unknown to the younger occupants of the table, the goddess and the sage were having a more serious mental conversation. Or at least she was trying to. Hestia Akalayan, the blonde in question, whined like a child. No, even telepathically, the goddess managed to project the image of herself crossing her arms, with a displeased expression. Oh, come on. It'll be fun. I'll take care of you like all the others, the man insisted. I refuse to abandon Olympus, Naruto. The deity unapologetically cut into his enthusiasm. She could feel flattered by the fact that such a powerful being liked her food so much, but she wasn't letting go of her family anytime soon. You ain't abandoning it. You're just gonna be working for me part-time, all the time. Please? I rarely ever found someone who could beat mine and Zetsu's standards. And you blew right through him with those delicious pancakes. Hell, let me sweeten the deal. I got great benefits, he pleaded. No. All the earthly and supernatural ingredients you need. I can get them. Think of the great ramen you can make with that. No. How about weekends? Just weekends? No. And this is my final answer, Naruto. Also, please get back on our previous subject. She tried to divert the conversation back to her original point. Ugh, Fiyin. But this ain't over. Hestia mentally rolled her eyes at his stubbornness. So he trailed off. What was the question again? The blonde man said sheepishly, making the goddess mentally facepalm. She was sympathizing with Zetsu more and more. It was like dealing with one of her more empty-headed nephews, or her younger brothers whenever a pretty woman passed by. Ugh, I asked you, why aren't you telling the kids about yourself? They're nice kids, I'm sure they'll still accept you either way. It simply made sense to the goddess to be honest with the demigods. They were kind children and obviously cared about the two Uzumakis a lot. There wasn't any need for this drama. It was unrealistic and illogical, as her wise niece would put it. Apollo could learn a thing or two about it since he loved using that ridiculous plotline in so many of his movies. Hestia-chan, you're a great gal, but can you say the same about all of your family? The man surprised her with the answer, so much so that she had no immediate response. I'm not lying to hurt them but to protect them. I don't need your little brother to declare them guilty by association, the sage elaborated. You've never met him. Zeus wouldn't do that. Hestia felt the need to protect her brother even if he knew that the man was partly right. She loved Zeus as any big sister would, but there was indeed a very high possibility that her brother would have tried blasting Naruto and anyone associated with him. She could even understand his paranoia in this case. Pantheonic threats like Naruto, the keyword being threat, were rarely known to be so kind or courteous. Maybe not, but I have enough experience with his type to know some risks aren't worth taking, he said, and the deity internally winced. They won't be in danger, Naruto, she assured. Even if Zeus somehow found out about this, she wouldn't let him go smite the children. Oh, I know they won't, I won't let him be. But I don't need the kids feeling like their own family is actively out to get them. They already went through a lot. The sage clarified and made Hestia let out an eye in understanding. Powerful as he may be, one could not simply change people's emotions, and if someone like Talia had to see her own father turn his lightning bolt against her, the goddess of the hearth had no doubt she'd be scarred mentally. Hestia had no response to the man, and he seemingly took it as his cue to cut off the mental connection, returning to his food with eagerness. Breakfast after that had passed without any incident. Hestia had even dropped the additional issues she wanted to discuss concerning Zetsu's missing clone. The goddess had been reminded through their conversation of the whole purpose of the sage's trip, to have a vacation without attracting attention. "It's not working out too well, is it?" The veiled deity had to suppress another giggle. The father and son were certainly a refreshing sight. She'd rarely seen beings of their level interact with mortals so casually, to the point of almost fooling her into believing they were mortals themselves, had she not known better. Ah well, she'd wait and see where this adventure would take her. "You sure you don't want to work for me?" "No." "Ah. Later." The group stood outside the emporium and in front of Hestia with their bags packed. The goddess in question smiled kindly at the group. "I'm sorry that I have to go for now, but I must go back to Olympus. I haven't notified anyone of my absence." "Ah. No problem, Hestia Chr. I mean Lady Hestia." The blonde man threw a conspiratorial wink that had both Hestia and Zetsu rolling their eyes at the man. "Thank you for the delicious meal you've made us. What do you say, kids?" he said and bowed to the deity. Naruto needn't tell them twice. While Luke and Talia opted to throw in their own thanks, Annabeth, cutely enough, copied Zetsu as the younger Uzumaki bowed as well in gratitude. "Thanks, big sis. Those were the best pancakes I've ever had," the boy added telepathically, now comfortable calling the goddess with that title, much to her delight. Naruto would have added his own piece, had he not been gushing over the youngest demigoddess who was now shyly holding onto his pant leg. "Ah, she's so cute." "Yafufa." "I'm restraining myself from pinching her rosy cheeks," the goddess agreed. "Yeah, an air about my dash." The blonde was mentally cut off. "The answer remains the same." Naruto. Hestia sent him a small glare. "Aw pooh." The oldest being between them pouted like a child. "I'm sorry to bother you, Lady Hestia, but before you leave, could you show us where Camp Half-Blood is?" Talia's voice cut through the mental conversation both adults were having. She seemed extremely nervous about asking the question, as if afraid of repercussions. That sight made the deity's heart ache. A child shouldn't look at her own aunt in such a way, the goddess thought in sadness. She swiftly approached the two, making them reflexively flinch, before she raised her hands and encircled them in a hug. "Talia dear. You don't need to be so formal with me," she said softly, making both teens blink in surprise. "I am your aunt, and Luke dear, you are my grandnephew," she continued gently. Naruto saw the scene and nudged Annabeth forward while she looked back at him nervously. Hestia felt a small weight at her side and smiled when she saw the young girl tentatively hugging her side. "We're family," the goddess spoke softly and felt the children relax in her hold, both from her words and her warm aura. After a few minutes of silence, they separated before the goddess held both teens by the shoulders, while Annabeth went to stand between them. "Go to Montauk, at the end of Long Island," Hestia said as she conjured a small piece of paper with an address written on it, and handed it to Naruto. "Camp Half-Blood, Half-Blood Hill, Farm Road 3.141/Long Island, New York 11954." The man read with a raised eyebrow. "Welp, that's that. Let's go, kids. We got a long journey ahead of us," the elder Uzumaki cheerfully declared, ushered the kids to the row, and had Zetsu follow them. "Thanks, and Hestia/thank you Hestia/thanks Auntie," were the final words of Talia, Luke, and Annabeth respectively as they trudged away with Zetsu moving after them as well. "Thanks again, big sis," the younger Uzumaki muttered when he passed by her, not sparing her glance even though the deity could see his cheeks color a bit. Hestia's heart soared at the words, and she internally swore to watch over the group. She suddenly felt a light pat on her back and turned to find Naruto standing with his face stretched in a grin. "Big sis, huh? Welcome to the family, Hestia-chan," he said low enough for the kids not to hear him, and making the goddess's face turn gold in embarrassment. "Shush!" She gave him a glare and only received a chuckle in response. The sage stopped laughing abruptly and turned to her with a serious expression. Both entities seemed to be having another mental conversation with each other before Hestia nodded with narrowed eyes and snapped her fingers. Naruto, for his part, sent a pulse of chakra through the ground, locating all the statues in the yard, before another pulse had the stone structures sink into the ground, leaving several mounds of dirt. Hestia looked around in amazement as small rock slabs rose at the edge of each statue's grave, acting as a makeshift tombstone, and turned to the man with an appreciative gaze. Nodding to her gratefully, he clasped his hand before him and uttered a short prayer before leaving to join the kids, who had, in the demigod's cases, been subjected briefly to the goddess's control over the mist, blocking any sound or movement that Naruto's technique had made. The sage suddenly stopped a few feet away from her, making her raise an eyebrow and wonder if he forgot anything. He disappeared suddenly, and before Hestia could wonder what was happening, she felt a familiar weight on her head. "Pat, pat!" she heard the man exclaim and run off with a laugh before she could deliver any just retribution for his embarrassing actions. The goddess sighed with a furious blush at the sage's antics. She looked at the group's retreating backs and silently wished them good luck, before teleporting away with only 3 questions on her mind. What manner of chaos would unfold if anyone else were to discover them? Who could such a powerful being be praying to? And more alarmingly, did she just get adopted? What? Chapter 11, Goat Meat is almost on the menu. A myriad of colors flowed from the orbs floating in the void. Naruto floated in a seiza position as the colorful rivers of energy came and converged all around him. The sage felt his chakra drain little by little as energy, or should he call it chakra as well? It was certainly similar enough, flowed between his palms and began to be molded and shaped. First, a small white orb containing a rotating storm of power manifested, and the blonde almost felt his hands vibrate from its intensity. It was crushed before the palms separated, and between them laid another orb, this time fiery brown and glowing, with what looked like beads rotating around it, each with their color and evidently their element. Naruto's palms met again, crushing the Rasengan-like technique before repeating the process, his creations becoming more complex with every try. After what seemed like hours, the blonde opened his palms one final time, showing what can only be described as a scaled-down star system. A fist-sized orb glowing white was orbited by hundreds of bead-sized globes of every color of the spectrum, all of which were encased in a translucent white bubble. Naruto's eyes shined in amazement at the sight. Galactic Rasengan? No, Karama'd laugh at me for it, too lame. Bahaha. That damned fox. The sage laughed as the technique was dispelled and the energies making it up returned to their respective domain. He could feel his body changing as time passed, the density of his muscles and skeleton skyrocketing under the effect of sage mode. The dark orange markings he had around his eyes had spread on his body, looking similar to flame-like tribal tattoos, another effect of his stay. This was the longest he's been in sage mode since he's learned it. How long has it been since he's been in this state? Since he's been in this void? A year? A decade? A century? Maybe more? Were the Bijou lonely without him? Were they arguing? He missed them. He looked around him, gazing at the multitude of domains he hadn't touched. He'd come to learn those were what he would call abstract or conceptual domains. Things like love, wisdom, madness, and many other aspects of the human spirit existed as orb-like apparitions, just like the more tangible or natural domains. He refused to use or connect to those, or at least the ones that change someone's spirit. He'd fought an entire war against someone whose sole purpose was to take away everyone's free will, and he would die before lowering himself to the same level. His musings were interrupted as he felt the void, impossibly enough, shake around him. The domains were vibrating in place erratically, almost as if they were shivering from fright or excitement. Suddenly the sage felt it, beyond the domains, beyond the seemingly endless expanse of space. There was something or someone there. Kagaya? Gaia? The Jubi? No presence had ever made him feel so small before. Whatever it was, Naruto felt simultaneously relieved and terrified from it. He could not explain it, but the instant he felt its gaze on him, it was like every speck of power he held vanished. He became an ant awaiting to be crushed underneath the giant's foot, and yet, despite that feeling, something instinctively told him the being wouldn't harm him. Naruto did not know when his body had moved, but he'd suddenly found himself in a kowtowed position, lowering his head in complete submission in the face of supreme power. The nature of the being became clear to him, the answer appearing in the back of his mind. With not a shred of doubt in his voice, he uttered the name. God. Preview to perfect sagehood, meeting the one above all. Olympus, Demeter's temple, 16th of September, 2000. Hestia brought the cup of tea to her lips. She sipped it, and hummed in pleasure at the rich flavor. Another sip was heard from the seat next to hers as her younger sister, the Queen of Olympus herself, sat in a simple yet regal purple toga and sipped from a similar cup. This tea is delightful, Sister Hera commented kindly, gaining a smile from her eldest sibling. The pair sat in silence, simply enjoying each other's company. Hera was usually described as regal, if not cold beauty. Even the myths pictured her as hardly approachable to anyone, even her family. But few were the ones who could get her to lower her guard completely. Her sisters, mother, and daughter Hebe were the only ones she ever felt truly comfortable with. Her husband, too. Most of the time. It's not like she'd wanted to be, as that stupid son of hers so eloquently put, the head bitch of Olympus, but them damn it. Her family, most of it anyway, made it hard not to be angry or frustrated 24/7. It sometimes felt like she was running a menagerie. If it wasn't the men in the family either chasing skirts or starting fights, it was her and the others' marriages causing her a headache because of how dysfunctional they were. Or the demigods. Them damned demigods. So yes, the goddess of marriage was pretty stressed. Tea time with her sisters was one of the only times she could feel genuine relief and remove the load she carried off her shoulders. Which is what she was doing right now, with Hestia, the kindest person she'd known next to her mother. And her sister Demeter, before whatever happened half a month ago happened. Sister, are you sure you don't want any tea? The goddess of family hesitantly broke the silence and looked at the third daughter of Rhea. Hera understood her hesitance. The goddess of harvest had changed ever since she'd been, as she'd put it, violated by either Hermes or whatever mysterious culprit had invaded her sacred potager. She'd become increasingly paranoid, jittery, and frustrated. She refused to exit her home, which had almost become a penitentiary. With servants stationed at all times around the premises, security systems added by Hephaestus himself, and even a horde of mutated houseplants. Yes, the Queen of Olympus had not wanted to come to Demeter's place, and only did so because her sister refused to come out. No, the blonde goddess in question answered curtly, frustrating her younger sister. Demeter, unlike both of her guests, was not sitting in a comfortable armchair, or wearing a toga. Oh no! The blonde goddess had seemingly taken a page out of Ares' book and taken to wearing military-like attire in her own home. She was posted at the nearest window with her head fixed on the garden, fingers tapping on the windowsill anxiously. Neither the queen nor the last Olympian had any words for that behavior. "Frickin' little thief, just try and take my precious greens again, you damned." Demeter trailed off as she muttered under her breath, unaware of her sister's progressively worried stares. Hestia, in particular, was facing an inner predicament. She initially figured that her dear sister was simply going through a phase, that the paranoia would subside with the thief's absence. Clearly, that was too much to hope for, because the middle daughter of Rhea had gotten worse. She briefly debated on the idea of simply outing Zetsu's existence, if only to have her sister return to her senses, but simply imagining the catastrophic results of such a decision made her hesitate. Even if she somehow got the two to keep quiet, the goddess of the hearth knew very well that Demeter was almost as vindictive as Hera. She would teleport to Earth and attempt to either kill or curse Zetsu, resulting in the boy's father getting involved, and the subsequent escalation of the conflict into a potential interpantheonic war. Sister? Do you need to talk about it? The eldest Olympian asked with worry. A brief silence enveloped the three, as Hera awkwardly sipped her own cup, before Demeter, almost robotically, turned her head towards her siblings. Hestia's resolve weakened upon seeing the bags under the blonde's eyes. "What's there to talk about? You know very well what happened, and unlike Zeus, she bit out the name so viciously. One could have mistaken her for the god's own wife. I am going to do something about it, she said with finality. My husband's incompetence aside, Hera started, earning a snort from the goddess of the seasons. Don't you think it's a bit excessive? The place looks like one of those mortal military bases for us sake, she commented while waving her hand around. No, the blonde goddess started before raising her arms in the air exasperatedly. You don't get it, Hera. I tried everything. I just don't understand how that intruder got through. My only guess was Hades because of his helm, but no, he was apparently out shopping with Persephone and too busy to screw me over. Sister, Hestia interrupted with a slight glare. Frustrated or not, there was no reason for rudeness. I know, sorry Hestia, but it's the truth. Hades is the only one able to do this undetected. Unless Hermes stole his helm or she waved her fingers, tone growing hysterical. A spy. That word made Hestia pale, unnoticed by the other two. That's right, a spy. It's the only explanation. Maybe the Norse are Demeter's theory was interrupted as her younger sister got up abruptly and walked over to her. All right, I think you've stayed up long enough. Hera, with a tone she used strictly when speaking to her own children, went over to the hysterical goddess and guided her away to the temple's master bedroom. Hestia was left alone with her thoughts. The eldest Olympian was utterly lost on what to do. She knew revealing Naruto and Zetsu's existence would cause cataclysmic chaos in Mount Olympus not seen since the Titanomachy, but leaving the issue hanging felt like a betrayal to her own sister. Maybe Mother would know, she thought as she followed Hera to put their sibling to bed, resolving to visit the Titan Queen for advice. Howell Township, New Jersey, same time. Zetsu groaned for the 57th time that morning at the loud laughter of his father. It wasn't Pop's fault per se, but the new addition to the group, someone that had joined them about a week ago when he came across them, had something that his father found interesting. The very moment Grover Underwood uttered his name, Zetsu's face had gone ash white as a positively menacing grin overtook the elder Uzumaki's face. Oh? And what a positively clover name you have! That was the first of so many plant-related puns, and Naruto wouldn't stop anytime soon. Oh no! No. It could never be that easy. His father was in one of his moods now. He practically spoke in puns nowadays, to the point even the demigods had gotten annoyed, as he invited Grover to join them on their journey. If Zetsu wasn't heavily considering murder at the moment, he might have commended the satyr for his notable hesitance on joining the clearly crazy blonde man. Clearly, the boy had some form of survival instinct that would help him if Zetsu ever got him alone. Yes, he realized Grover wasn't at fault, but god damn it, there was no such thing as coincidences, and it felt like them meeting a guy with a very punny, god damn it, name was the result of some luck spirit/god's machinations. I swear if one of the Shichifukujin, one, is somehow behind this, I will be growing an entire tree up their dash. Zetsu! What are you doing looking so sad over there? The father's voice interrupted his cursing and he looked back at the man, sighing and going over to him. He'd been trying to keep his negative thoughts to himself because he did not want to upset the man or worse, bring down one of his patented fatherly lectures on him. The younger Uzumaki shivered at the thought. No siree. Back to his father, the blonde man had helped the group set up their camp for the night, all the while badgering each of the members with more puns. Zetsu honestly wondered how long it would take before one of them would snap. Alright, I've tried to stay quiet about this, but enough with the puns already. The raven-haired demigoddess screamed in anger. So the Spitfire was the one to give in first. Unsurprising. The girl had thrown the firewood she'd been carrying in the air and sparked with electricity in response to her anger. Luke had instinctively moved to put Annabeth behind him, while Grover had bleated in fright. Naruto's grin never wavered as he simply raised an eyebrow at the girl. Oh, but I was having such a fun. Here the man leaned closer to the girl while putting both hands on his knees and continued, time he winked. Something seemed to crack into Leah's mind as she finally abandoned all reason and pounced on the comedian with an animalistic roar. As the two got into a scuffle, mostly Naruto holding Leah back and laughing as her electricity tickled him, Zetsu looked at the other two demigods and saw them putting some distance away from the two. Luke had apparently wisely decided to let the girl resolve her issues without damaging himself. Smart boy. And now, the younger Uzumaki gleefully turned towards the still terrified Grover. It's just you and me, little goat, said Saturn. Looked at the teen's almost inhumanly large smile, and couldn't help but gulp. Grover Underwood was torn, all things considered. On one hand, finding 3 demigods in one place was, well, a jackpot by Protector standards. It meant more people to guide and potentially a great way to be promoted to scout, which was his life goal, to be able to look for their missing patron. On the other hand, there were the extra company. Granted, Mr. Naruto was a good chaperone for the group and knew his way around nature, not to mention he and the other Uzumaki both felt like what he could only qualify as male dryads, something that put him in Grover's good books, but his seemingly ridiculous strength also put the satyr on constant edge. Talia, Luke, and Annabeth probably believed that nonsense he spouted about training because they did not know the limits of the human body. Something that the goat boy was very much more aware of, having spent a lot of time around other demigods at camp and having received lessons on those subjects from Chiron himself. And Mr. Naruto? It was safe to say that Grover had his doubts about whether or not the blonde man was truly mortal, something that the man insisted on. Regardless of his build, the satyr had seen Naruto defeat much larger monsters with seemingly ridiculous ease. Never mind the fact said man was now playing with an angry Talia, whom the satyr could clearly see was emitting sparks of electricity like a lightning rod. It was all just so confusing,